Are you fascinated by fungi? Hey fungi friends, I'm out on the Sonoma coast ready to do some mushroom hunting. It's the winter season, so the porcini have kind of died off, but we're looking for a great set of mushrooms that are really easy for beginner foragers to identify. It's called a winter trio. So we have a black trumpet, a yellowfoot, and a hedgehog mushroom, and they're all absolutely delicious and really easy to find, and they're super common out here at Salt Point on the Sonoma coast. So we're gonna be kind of hunting in between tan oak and huckleberry and some pine trees, and just really paying attention to the forest floor, because the mushrooms we're looking for are all fairly small, but they're very distinctive, and that's what makes them so easy for beginners to identify. They're also, importantly, very delicious. So there's some of my absolute favorite edible mushrooms, and there should just be carpets of them out there because it's been raining so much. So let's check them out and see what we can find. Wow, look at this huge hedgehog. So we're walking around at Salt Point, and I saw this sort of big white thing, and I wasn't sure what it was from above. I thought it might be a chanterelle, and I popped this out of the ground, and I looked underneath, and there's all these little teeth. So immediately I knew that this was a hedgehog. Beautiful, pinky mushroom that's sort of evolutionarily related to a chanterelle, and they can grow for a long time and get very large. It's really exciting to see one this size, because usually hedgehogs don't get bigger than a button before someone gets really excited and picks one. So we have some pretty big mature ones here, and they're just absolutely perfect because these resist rot and mold and bugs. They don't have that much of a smell, but they do have these just very distinctive little teeth underneath that you're always sure you've got a hedgehog. There's sort of two main types of hedgehogs. There's smaller ones that are known as belly button hedgehogs. They have a little kind of divot right in the middle of the cap, thus belly button hedgehog. And then there are these much larger ones, which are sort of known as like the wood hedgehog, or kind of a hedgehog rapandum type. I'll kind of show you what I saw when we were coming in here. There was one in the ground. I saw this one from the top, and then we noticed a few more kind of underneath this pine tree. They're mycorrhizal with a pine, and so we're finding these just absolutely beautiful, massive hedgehogs here. And there's a few more around. You want to very carefully lift these up. It's not really necessary to cut these because they'll just kind of pop out of the ground on their own. And as long as you're gentle with them, you're not really going to disturb the mycelium. And they've come up with a fair bit of dirt and other stuff on them. What an amazing find to see these just absolutely massive hedgehogs. Each one of these is probably a pound. You know, this is a serious amount of mushroom. And they're just sweet, nutty, delicious, some of my absolute favorite mushrooms to cook and eat. You have a tree back there, and you have these embankments where it's kind of disturbance coming outwards, and the moss and the lichens and stuff first colonize it. And I think the mushrooms like to kind of push out there because they can settle down their spores and form new mycorrhizal associations with the plants as they're growing out into these areas of disturbance. So I think that's something that mushrooms have kind of evolved to do, is to thrive on these little muddy, mossy embankments on the edge of trails and things like that, because they're trying to kind of, repopulate the forest as they go. We're out in tan oak habitat, and we're finding one of my absolute favorite edible mushrooms. This is the black trumpet. Craterellus calicornicopedes is the species we have here in California, and it's mycorrhizal with tan oak, and you usually find it sort of around the base of the tan oak, either right up against the tree or sometimes in kind of like a mossy embankment around it. These are hollow, so they're similar to the Yellowfoot Craterellus in that they're hollow. They don't really have defined gills, so it's not really like decurrent the way that a chanterelle would be, but they are related to chanterelles, and they're absolutely delicious edible mushrooms that are super versatile. They have a very earthy, almost truffle-like flavor that's slightly reminiscent of sort of a morel. They're definitely one of the more ethereal and special mushroom flavors. They're not super meaty because they have pretty thin flesh, but they dry out really well, and they're amazing in something like a risotto or on a pizza. They do really, really well in cream sauces where that kind of earthy flavor spreads around and helps flavor all the other ingredients. These have a white spore print, and they're pretty easy to ID because, there's not many other things in the forest that are black. Surprisingly, they're just absolutely delicious and one of my favorite things to find. So hope we can find a few more out here on the coast. Ooh, they smell good. Yeah. They do kind of have like a truffly, slightly morel-like aroma that's just really special when it comes to mushrooms, So I've been walking around here in tan oak habitat looking for black trumpets, and they're really, really difficult to find because they're black on the forest floor. And I just found a huge vein of them running up the hill here. So I started out with a couple of relatively small ones at the base, got a few here, and then as I was looking up, I saw more and more. So there's one big cluster here, and there's a few more hiding right in the duff right here. There's a big cluster right here, kind of hidden by a stick. There's a big cluster right here. There's another cluster here, and here, and here, and here. They're just everywhere, and it's so exciting to find these big, beautiful black trumpets. Oh, they're absolutely one of my favorite edible mushrooms. I'll just use my fingernail to kind of pinch off the base. These are pretty dirty on the base, so I almost always like to trim the bottom off, either with my fingernail or a knife. I might use a knife just because I have so many here and I don't want to get my fingernails that dirty. The other thing I'm going to be really careful of here is there's quite a few, and I don't need all of them. So I'm going to pick the biggest, most mature, most prime specimens I can and leave some of these smaller specimens kind of down in the duff so they're able to spread their spores. And that's nice too, because these do tend to grow in clusters, and so sometimes using a knife allows you to harvest the nice big mature ones without affecting the smaller ones in a cluster and let those have a chance to mature and then spread their spores. So that's something I'm always kind of aware of, is the age and maturity of a mushroom that I'm picking, how much it's really had a chance to do its purpose as a mushroom, which is to spread its spores. I think it's important for me to practice sustainability and harvest things ethically, because I feel like that's kind of my rule with mushrooms, is if they're so big and obvious that I can see them, I'm gonna go ahead and harvest them. But if they are on the smaller side and they're really hard to notice, then they've kind of earned the right to stay there and get bigger. Ooh, okay. Nice little flush of hedgehogs here. Some are pretty small, so I'll leave those, or the ones that are kind of starting to dry out, I'll leave those. But the bigger ones, yeah, better believe I'll get myself some hedgies. Generally try not to pick any mushroom that's like smaller than my thumb kind of thing. And this one's interesting, it's like two separate caps that fused. These are really, really tasty, and I also like them because they'll last in the fridge for a long time. So they are definitely one of my favorite mushrooms to get here in the winter season. Tend to find them under tan oak and sort of mixed hardwood and conifer forests. So yeah, we'll keep moving here. Yeah, there's a few more kind of hiding out in the duff down here, which is good. Got these. This is good habitat. We're in the right kind of spot. We got tan oaks, we got nice thick duff. You can actually see around, which is also sort of a luxury, and a lot of times you're hunting, you're having to kind of scoot over and around and stuff like that. But the fact that it's so open also makes it more accessible for humans to see stuff, and having less dense brush cover means that there's less moisture being held in the soil too. So you can tell that you're in winter mushroom season when all of these little hygroscopy waxy caps start coming up, because they're definitely associated with kind of cool, cold weather. They're so bright and gorgeous and vibrant. People always assume that they're toxic. They're not. I'm pretty sure you can eat pretty much all hygroscopy waxy caps. They're just not good. They're kind of slippery and flimsy. Very, very pretty, but not particularly good edibles. It's good to see that Yellowfeet and candy caps are here. You can kind of keep exploring through this habitat. Good protected zone. So I found some nice little clusters of the Yellowfeet. They're little winter chanterelles. These are Craterellus tubiformis, or pacificus. This is technically a different species, but these are pretty common, delicious mushroom that has kind of a yellow stem, and then it gets a little darker brown up top. But it has the same kind of decurrent gills that a chanterelle has, even though it's hollow in the middle. So that's what makes it a Craterellus, not a true chanterelle. But they're just all over the place here. So to harvest a Yellowfoot, come down. You can pull it out, but I like to kind of just use my thumbnail to pinch the base. There we go. Beautiful little Yellowfoot. What a fantastic selection of edible mushrooms here that I found on the Sonoma coast, and one of my absolute favorite of the winter trio, the Yellowfoot, black trumpet, and the hedgehogs. Wow, what a find. So I'm just trimming off the little overly brown bits on the edge of the chanterelle, which happens because they were so wet when I harvested them. I don't think there's anything wrong about eating them, they're just not quite as tasty. So here's the big, chunky hedgehog, and similar to a chanterelle, I can kind of just use part of my knife to peel off any dirt or discoloration that I don't super want to eat. You can see here this is getting a little soggy, so I might cut off some of these parts that are a little discolored because I don't think they would taste quite as good. Slice these up in nice big meaty pieces so we can really experience that texture. So I'm going to show you guys how I clean these Craterellus mushrooms. The Yellowfoot and the black trumpet are both related, and they're hollow inside. That is one of the defining features of a Craterellus. If I break this open, boom, that's exactly why I break these open, because there's a little bit of needle and other stuff in here that if I didn't break open the middle of the mushroom, it would just be there. It's just the fact that they grew up from the ground means that they inherently have some junk in them. The fibers run kind of longitudinally, and so if you leave those fibers whole, they will have better texture when cooked because they'll be a little bit more meaty. And I'm just going to kind of make little piles of them in the pan. So they should all have fairly similar textures and flavors on a spectrum of mushrooms. They're going to be distinctly different from each other, which is kind of the cool part of getting to try them. And put a little knob of butter into the chanterelles, a little knob of butter into the big hedgehog, and we'll put a little knob of butter into the small hedgehogs. And this is a good time too to add a little bit more salt, because the initial hit of salt was really to just help release all the water, and then this is about developing that flavor and baking in kind of that complexity. You start to smell the aroma. A little bit of butter gets in there. It starts to smell real nice. So I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit too, because I don't want to burn that butter, and I do want these to like sit and brown. Essentially, the longer you can cook a mushroom, the more you develop the flavor. Some people get really confused because they think you should they've seen chefs kind of flash like a vegetable in a pan, or like, oh, I shouldn't cook a mushroom that much. They think for some reason that it maintains the nutrition better if you don't overcook it. And if anything, like cooking a mushroom more enhances the nutrition because you break down the complex polysaccharides and the proteins and all the other stuff more with heat, and then you get more nutritional value out of your food because it's easier to digest. And I'm just letting these get really nice and brown. This is what I like using chopsticks for too. I can look at a certain mushroom and say, ooh, it's really brown on one side, it's not as brown on the other side. So let me flip it over and develop that as browning right there. That is extra flavor, that is umami. And the more umami you can develop on your mushroom, the tastier it's going to be. And so chopsticks give me a chance to really manipulate and then also choose which mushroom I want to turn over. So these are done. I turn the heat off. So we just cooked up a couple of mushrooms. We have a nice little selection of the belly button hedgehog, the big kind of wood hedgehog, and some beautiful golden chanterelles, the Craterellus californicus. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of try them out. So I did a very simple saute in a dry pan. I threw the mushrooms in, let all the water cook out, salted them a little bit, added just a little bit of butter, browned it off, and just a little bit more salt to finish. So I'm trying to let the flavor of the mushroom shine through here as I'm tasting these, because I want to not hide it behind a bunch of garlic and herbs and other stuff. I just want to try these mushrooms. So here's the belly button hedgehog, the little Hydnum organensis. The stem on that is super meaty, chewy. It's a little sweet, a little nutty. I'm going to try a cap piece too, because sometimes those are a little bit different. That's even sweeter. It's not as meaty, but it is a little bit more mushroomy. So the stipe in some ways is very meaty, very textural, and then the cap is sweet and nutty. So I'm going to try the other big hedgehog next. I'll try the stem first, and I'll try a cap. So a nice big rounded stem. It's more meaty. It's a little less fibrous. It doesn't have quite as much flavor. It's still savory and good, but not as sweet. Here's a cap. It's meaty. It's a little bit sweeter. Again, I think the cap has a little more mushroom flavor, but it's not super intense. I'm gonna try the chanterelles. The chanterelles are a little more well-known. Yeah, okay. That's why. They have the most flavor. They are not as sweet and nutty, but they're a little bit more earthy, and they're a lot more meaty in either one of these. Really good, textural, delicious tasty mushroom. So 2 kinds of hedgehogs and some chanterelles. So continuing our mushroom tasting, we've got the Yellowfoot chanterelle and the black trumpet. And so these are both Craterellus. They're not as thick and meaty as the Cantharellus, the true golden chanterelle. They're a little bit more kind of thin and waxy walled, and you see that when you cook them down because they release a lot of water. These were very, very wet, tons of water in the pan. And then when they cook down, they're a little limp, but that's okay because they're still really tasty. So this is the Yellowfoot. I'm gonna try this out. Again, these were just very simple, salt, a little bit of butter. It's very soft, very supple texture. It's a little bit fibrous because I just kind of broke them in half, and if I cut across them, they wouldn't be quite as fibrous, but I left long fibers in the mushroom. It's very mild. It's a little bit sweet. It doesn't have a ton of its own texture. If I'd cooked it longer and developed the umami more, it'd be a little bit more savory. It's kind of a culinary blank canvas in the sense that you can paint any flavors you want on top of these. And because of that, you can actually use them to make sweet dishes. So I really like to boil Yellowfeet mushrooms in a 2-to-1 sugar syrup, and then I flavor them with a little bit of candy cap, and they're incredible on top of ice cream like that. They're so good. So I like them like this. They'd be really good on pasta. So let's try the black trumpet. It's much more chewy, much more meaty, a little less fibrous than the Yellowfoot. The flavor is very deep and rich and savory umami with like deep, earthy, forest floor vibes. It's on par a little bit with like a morel or a truffle. And I don't know if that's just the fact that it's black and it kind of makes me think of those mushrooms, but this is absolutely one of my favorites. It's super, super tasty. I'm super stoked we found a lot of them today. So great chance to try the Yellowfoot chanterelle and the black trumpet. 2 awesome and very tasty Craterellus species that are part of the winter trio.